There's some steps you can take to ensure the health of your chickens during the winter. So today, let's talk about the top 7 tips for winter chicken care. Tip number 1 is you want a draft-free coop. Now, this doesn't mean an airtight coop or a coop that doesn't have a lot of air movement. What this means is you don't want a draft moving over your chickens where they roost. So this is definitely the time of year where you want to be getting into your chicken coop and make sure any holes you have, like if you have any holes in the roof or the walls or in the seams or anything like that, you want to make sure you're getting those taken care of. Any air movement you have in your chicken coop, you want to make sure it's where you want it to be. So what can happen is if you have your vents right... Oh, hey, neighbor! So what can happen is if your vents are right there where your chickens roost, that air is going to be moving past them all throughout the winter. What you'll start to see is their combs are going to start turning black. You're going to start dealing with frostbite, and frostbite's the number one thing you want to be preventing during the winter months. So make sure that your vents are set up in a way that you have them either in front of your chickens or above your chickens. Just make sure you're not going to be having that air movement right where your chickens are going to be on their roost. And the number 2 tip we're going to talk about today is you want to have a dry coop. And I'm not talking just like a little bit dry. You want to keep this thing completely dry on the inside. During the winter, chickens need to be bone dry. Think about it this way. When I grew up here in Utah, we went sledding all the time. If you've ever been sledding, you know what I'm talking about. When you get there, it is so much fun. As time goes on, you get more wet. And as soon as your body gets wet and your clothes get wet, you're freezing. You are cold to your bones and you just want to go home and have some hot chocolate. Your chickens are the same way. If they get wet during the winter, it pretty much renders their nice little down coat that they have useless. So give your coop a nice inspection. Go through the roof, make sure there's no leaks, go through the walls, everywhere, make sure you're not leaking anywhere. And it's not just exterior moisture that I'm talking about either, with the rain and the snow and stuff like that. Chickens themselves create heat, which also create condensation, and they're also breathing, which is also going to create condensation. And so you really want to have good ventilation in your chicken coop. So going back to tip number 1, you want to have good ventilation to make sure you keep that coop dried out. Tip number 3 is the type of food you're giving your chickens. So in the winter, they need a higher calorie intake than they do in the summer. You want to give them a lot of high protein, high calorie, high carb treats. For treats, we use Grub Terra, and it is black soldier fly larva, and it comes with just loaded full of protein and calcium and things like that. And for just kind of the base food, we use a higher protein layer pellet, and that seems to work really well for us. So what you can do is right before bedtime, right before they're going into their coop and settling down for the night, you can give them something like cracked corn or even some scratch grains, something that's kind of a higher carb, and that's going to go a really long way to keeping them warm inside the coop at night. Tip number 4 for winter chicken care is going to be water. Chickens are 65% water, and that means it kind of controls their body temperature, their metabolism, their waist, all kinds of different things. If you plan on keeping your hens laying during the winter, eggs are made up of roughly 74% water. So to keep up with the egg supply, you're going to have to give them a nice fresh source of water all winter long. There's a few things you can do to keep up with the fresh water during the winter. One of those is you can do what I'm currently doing, and you can get a water dish where you just kind of come out once a day and, you know, break out the water, dump it out, and refill it with some fresh water. This is something you kind of want to be able to keep up on if you can't be getting out there every day to make sure they have access to that fresh water that's fresh liquid water that's not frozen. You might want to start looking into some other alternatives to make sure they have some fresh water. One thing we've noticed is during the summer, we use the little chicken nipples for our water, and it works really great. We only have to fill it up every few days or so, and it's really helpful. During the winter, we can't use that. It doesn't matter how hard we try, those little nipples are going to freeze up, and the chickens won't be able to get their water. So during the winter, we end up just using a dish, a nice little shallow dish that kind of gives them free access to the water. But with that, we do have to refill it about once a day. Depending on how cold it gets, we'll have to refill that multiple times a day. I know it's not fun, but it's something you have to do. It's not really fair to the chickens to let their water freeze over and just kind of leave it out there forever. So make sure you're going in and replacing their water anytime it gets frozen. If that's not something you're willing to do, there are alternatives. There are heated chicken waters, and there's actually a whole lot of different varieties and different kinds and different ways of heating your chicken water. I'll put a few really good examples down in the description below, and it's something we might end up switching to by the end of this winter. We'll see how long we feel like coming out and replacing their water every day. And one quick thing to mention with the water is, yes, putting it in the chicken coop is going to keep it a little bit warmer and maybe potentially even keep it from freezing. But one thing to think about though is if you have chickens that make a mess of their water, so they get it there and they flip it over and they trample all over it, stuff like that, that's going to go directly against what tip number 2 was with keeping your coop dry. If they don't keep their water neat, you want to make sure that you're putting the water outside of the coop so that way they're not spilling the water and soaking your whole coop. But with us, we can, as long as it's like just barely at freezing or just below freezing, if we put our water inside the coop with the little nipples, they don't freeze up in there, and so we can get away with it all the way down to probably, I would say 20 degrees Fahrenheit, we can get away with it. Anything below that, where it does start freezing in there, that's kind of where it just doesn't really make sense to use the chicken nipple nipples or keep it inside the coop. Tip number 5 for winter chicken care is going to be deep litter. I'm sure you've heard about the deep litter method, and this is going to be very important with the winter chicken coop. If done correctly, a good deep litter method coop is going to be generating heat. So if you think about it, when you make a compost pile just out in your yard, that compost pile is going to generate heat, and everybody knows that you can put weeds and stuff inside of your compost pile because that heat is going to kill off all the seeds and stuff. Well, that same thing happens on a much smaller scale with the deep litter method. So make sure you're putting a bunch of like wood shavings and stuff like that, just really, really deep litter inside your coop. And what's going to happen is your birds are going to start to poop on it. It's going to start to build up. And then as it gets gross, just go ahead and put another layer on. Don't pull that stuff out, leave it in there. It's going to generate a very small amount of heat. Might not be a lot. It might just be, 1 degree or so, but it's going to generate a very small amount of heat. On top of that, it's going to be adding an insulation layer to your chicken coop. And although it might not be much, if you've got birds down there on that insulation layer, it's going to warm it up really nice. It's going to hold in that heat inside your coop, and you're not going to have that cold air or that coldness coming up through your floor. So having that nice deep bedding method in there, it's going to add some insulation, it's going to add some heat, it's going to keep your birds really happy. And then what's even better is during the spring, what you can do is you can pull that deep bedding out and you can use it in the garden. So what we normally do is during the spring, we'll pull it out and put it in the garden, and then we start the new deep bedding right in the spring. So we'll pull everything out, we'll use it in the garden, we'll fill the coop back up with some deep bedding, and then we'll just add to it all year long. With us, our coop is really big, and we have it set up really nicely for the deep bedding method, but we just sit there and add more and more and more all season long, to where by the time winter comes, they've already got a nice established deep bedding in there, and it never really gets gross for us. We're able to add quite a bit, and it doesn't stink, it doesn't get sopping wet, and it just works really, really well for us. Definitely good, especially during the winter. Hey, real quick, if you're getting value from this video, go down and hit the like button, consider subscribing to our channel, maybe share this with your friends. We really appreciate it, and it helps us out a lot. The number 6 winter chicken care tip is going to actually be the breed of chicken that you're keeping, and different breeds are kind of made for the cold weather compared to others. Some birds just really don't do well in the winter, and you kind of want to steer clear of those. In general, if you have a really feathered bird that has a small comb on its head, that's going to be a good winter bird. If you live somewhere that does get some really cold weather, some really cold winters, maybe stay away from those chickens that have like the really big combs on the top of their heads, because those are the first things that get frostbite. Some of the good breeds for some colder weather is going to be your Australorps. A lot of your silkies that don't have the big combs, they just kind of have the pom-poms and they're feathered from the head down. Those are going to be really good for the winter, as well as Buff Orpingtons and maybe some Plymouth Rocks. Those are going to be some really good cold weather chicken breeds. There's going to be a whole bunch of other ones that are also going to be good. Those are just some of the ones that I've personally dealt with. So just make sure if you're looking into getting chickens and you live in a place that has some colder temperatures, make sure you're getting some chickens that are good in cold temperatures. When you go to buy them, it should say right there wherever you're buying them at, what kind of weather they're good with. So just make sure that's something that you really truly consider. The number 7 winter chicken care tip is going to be using caution with heat lamps. And this is something that I personally have kind of made the mistake of for the last probably 2 or 3 years. I was putting heat lamps in my chicken coop, and it's not something you really need, and it can be more danger than good. I did a lot of research into this over the summer, because at the end of the winter, I had a lot of people ask me about my heat lamps, and I really started looking into it because I wanted to know what the pros and cons might be with them. So today I'm going to share that with you. First off, a heat lamp can kind of have some really big safety issues going along with them, and the first is going to be it can burn your chickens. They get really hot, the chickens can fly up and hit them, and they can get burnt. And the second one is obviously a fire danger. I can't tell you the amount of people I've had contact me and talk to me about how they had heat lamps in their coop, and it burnt their coop to the ground, coming close to burning their house to the ground, killed off their entire flock. And it's something that really truly does happen, and it happens in an instant. Remember, during the winter, you've got a really dry coop, and so it's very flammable. To me, it's not worth it. A chicken's body temperature is anywhere between 105 and 107 degrees Fahrenheit, so they are literally just like mini heaters, and their resting heart rate is anywhere between 200 and 300. So they are literally just sitting there creating and generating heat. They are built for the cold. They have no problem with the cold, and even though it's cold for us, it doesn't mean it's cold for them. So I know you might feel bad keeping your chickens in the cold, but they get used to it and they do totally fine. Chickens naturally acclimate to the cold. So as soon as fall hits, it starts getting colder and colder and colder, and over time they get used to that cold. Let's say you have a heat lamp and one day the power goes out. So those chickens go from a nice warm coop to a bone-chilling cold coop in a matter of minutes. They don't have any time to acclimate to that cold. That's where you're gonna run into some issues. You're gonna end up with some sick birds, could potentially lead to some long-term health effects, possibly even the death of your chickens. So yes, it might sound nice to have some heat in your coop, But if that heat goes away, they have no protection against that cold because they had no time to acclimate to that cold. If you do live somewhere that gets insanely cold, I'm talking like 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit cold, and you really do just want to look into a way of heating your coop, maybe look into some radiant heat panels. They make them specifically for chicken coops, and they are so much more safe than a heat lamp would be. I'm gonna leave some down in the description below, so go ahead and go check those out. We don't use them here, but we also only hit about 0 degrees Fahrenheit here. We don't get super cold. So if you do get super cold, you really are interested in looking into a way to heat your coop, that's a better way to go. It doesn't give it the heat that a heat lamp will, but it does keep them warm enough. And then do me a favor, go watch this video right here. If you enjoyed this video today, you're gonna enjoy this one too, so go watch it and I'll see you there.